Stop pretending. Cook, you old hag, my daughter-in-law laughed, standing in the doorway while I was still clutching the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I simply nodded, turned away, and lowered myself into the nearest chair before my legs gave out completely. The next morning, I called the bank. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story reaches, because what happened in my own home still feels unreal, even to me. The house felt different after the surgery. Not just quieter, but colder. As if something invisible had shifted the moment I came back from the hospital. It had only been 3 days since I was discharged. 3 days since I lay under fluorescent lights, surrounded by masked strangers, trusting them to keep my heart beating. At 72, you learn not to take those moments lightly. You understand that every procedure carries a risk, every recovery is a gift. Or at least, that's what I believed. When my son, Daniel, picked me up from the hospital, he had been polite. Distant, but polite. He held the passenger door open, helped me ease into the seat, even asked if I needed anything on the drive home. But he didn't look at me. Not really. His eyes stayed fixed on the road, his answers short, as if conversation itself was an inconvenience. I told myself he was tired. That work had been stressful. That grief still lingered from losing his father 5 years ago. We all carry things differently. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt a flicker of relief. Home. My home. The place I had lived in for over 30 years. The place where Daniel had taken his first steps, where his father had built the wooden deck with his own hands, where every corner held a memory stitched into the walls. But as soon as I stepped inside, something felt off. The air smelled different. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. Like someone had opened all the windows and let the house forget me. Watch your step, Daniel muttered as I crossed the threshold. I nodded, gripping my purse a little tighter. My body still felt fragile, like glass that hadn't fully set. Every movement sent a dull ache through my side where the incision was healing. The doctor had warned me. No heavy lifting, no standing for long periods, plenty of rest. Rest. It sounded simple when he said it. Inside, the living room had been rearranged. The armchair I used to sit in every evening, gone. Replaced by a sleek, modern recliner that didn't belong to me. Oh, I said softly, more to myself than to anyone else. We needed more space, came her voice. Carolyn. She stood by the hallway, arms crossed, perfectly put together as always. Not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in her blouse. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I thought it would be easier for everyone, she added. Easier. I nodded again. That seemed to be the only thing I could manage lately. Of course, I said. Daniel disappeared upstairs without another word. Carolyn watched me for a moment longer, then turned on her heel and walked toward the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. The sound echoed. I stood there in the middle of my own living room, feeling like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. That first night, I barely slept. Pain woke me every few hours, a sharp reminder that my body was still healing. But it wasn't just the physical discomfort. It was the silence. No one checked on me. No one asked if I needed water or medication or even just company. At some point, I found myself staring at the ceiling, tracing the faint cracks in the paint I used to complain about but never fixed. My husband used to say they gave the house character. Nothing perfect lasts, he would joke. I wondered what he would say now. The next morning, I moved slowly down the stairs, one hand gripping the railing, the other pressed lightly against my side. Each step required careful balance, a quiet negotiation between pain and determination. I could hear voices from the kitchen, Daniel's low murmur, Carolyn's sharper tone. I paused halfway down, not intending to listen, but unable to ignore it. She can't just sit around all day, Carolyn said. She just had surgery, Daniel replied, though there was no conviction in his voice. And, Carolyn snapped, people recover. They don't become useless. Useless. The word hung in the air like something sour. I took another step down, making my presence known. The conversation stopped instantly. When I entered the kitchen, Carolyn was already at the stove, stirring something in a pan. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. Neither of them looked surprised to see me. Good morning, I said. Daniel glanced up briefly. Morning, Mom. Carolyn didn't turn around. There's coffee, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the counter. I poured myself a cup, my hands trembling slightly. not just from weakness, but from something deeper. Something I didn't want to name yet. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I sipped my coffee. Daniel typed on his phone. Carolyn continued cooking, the rhythmic scrape of the spatula against the pan filling the space between us. It felt like I was intruding on a routine that no longer included me. Finally, I cleared my throat. The doctor said I should take it easy for a couple of weeks. I offered, trying to sound casual. No standing for too long. Carolyn let out a short laugh. That was the moment. The one that would replay in my mind over and over again. She turned to face me, leaning casually against the counter, her eyes scanning me from head to toe as if assessing damage. "Stop pretending," she said, her voice light, almost amused. "Cook, you old hag." The words landed harder than any physical blow. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. But then she smiled. And I knew I hadn't. I looked at Daniel, my son, the boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. The teenager who once stayed up all night helping me fix a leaky pipe because he didn't want me to do it alone. The man who had promised, at his father's funeral, that he would always take care of me. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look up. His thumb kept moving across his phone screen, as if whatever was there mattered more than the moment unfolding right in front of him. Something inside me shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a door closing. "I see," I said. My voice sounded steady, calmer than I felt. I placed my coffee cup down carefully, making sure it didn't clatter against the counter. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen. Each step felt deliberate, measured, controlled. I didn't go far, just into the living room, where I lowered myself slowly into the unfamiliar recliner that had replaced my chair. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. The house was no longer mine. Not really. Not in the ways that mattered. Upstairs, I could hear footsteps, doors opening and closing, life continuing as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just been reduced to something disposable in my own home. I thought about the surgery, about the fear I felt lying on that hospital bed, signing forms I barely read, trusting that I would wake up. I thought about my husband, about the way he used to hold my hand during every doctor's appointment, no matter how small. "You're not alone," he would always say. But now I understood something I had been avoiding for a long time. I was alone, completely, and the people I had trusted most had made that very clear. I sat there until the light shifted across the floor, until the shadows grew longer and the house settled into its usual rhythm. Then, slowly, I reached for my purse. My hands no longer trembled. Inside, tucked between old receipts and a folded photograph of my husband, was my wallet, and in it, my bank card. I held it for a moment, turning it between my fingers. Then I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of clarity. The next morning, I went to the bank. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not Daniel. Not Carolyn. No one asked anyway. The house was quiet when I left, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels indifferent. I moved slowly, careful with each step, my hand brushing along the wall for balance as I made my way to the front door. My body still ached from the surgery, a deep, constant reminder that I wasn't as strong as I used to be. But something else had changed. The trembling from the day before, it was gone. In its place was something steadier, colder. Outside, the morning air felt sharper than usual. I paused on the porch, letting it fill my lungs. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at the yard my husband used to take care of every weekend. The grass was slightly overgrown now, the flower beds uneven. No one had been paying attention. I suppose that shouldn't have surprised me. The drive to the bank was quiet. I kept the radio off. I didn't want noise. I wanted clarity. Every red light, every turn, every passing storefront felt oddly significant, like I was seeing the world from a different angle. Not as someone's mother. Not as someone's responsibility. Just myself. When I walked into the bank, the familiar scent of polished floors and paper greeted me. It hadn't changed. Not like everything else. A young teller looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today?" Her voice was warm, neutral, respectful. It struck me how different that felt. "I'd like to review my accounts," I said. She nodded and guided me to a desk near the back, where a man in a gray suit introduced himself as Mr. Carter. He spoke gently, the way people do when they see your age before they see you. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Let's take a look." Whitmore. My husband's last name. Hearing it still grounded me. He pulled up my information, his eyes scanning the screen. I watched his expression shift, just slightly. Is everything all right? I asked. He hesitated for half a second, just enough for me to notice. Well, there have been some recent changes to your account activity. My fingers tightened around my purse. What kind of changes? He turned the screen slightly toward me. There have been multiple transfers over the past few months. Larger than your usual pattern. I leaned in, squinting at the numbers. I didn't need my glasses to understand what I was seeing. Withdrawals. Consistent. Quiet. Strategic. Amounts just small enough not to trigger immediate concern, but large enough to add up. My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I already knew. Who authorized these? I asked, my voice calm. Mr. Carter clicked through a few more screens. It appears your son, Daniel, was added as a secondary user on this account last year. Last year? That would have been around the time my surgery consultations began. The time when I was distracted, worried, focused on my health. Was I notified? I asked. There's a signed authorization form, he said carefully. It looks like it was processed in person. I thought back. Doctor's offices. Paperwork. Forms I signed without reading too closely because I trusted the person handing them to me. Because I trusted my family. I see, I said. And I did. More than he realized. I sat back in my chair, letting the silence stretch for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just necessary. How much? I asked finally. He gave me the number. I didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, something settled into place. A pattern. A confirmation. A truth I could no longer ignore. Can I remove his access? I asked. Of course, Mr. Carter replied. We can also set up additional protections if you'd like. I nodded. Yes, I think that would be wise. The process was simple. Too simple. A few signatures. A few clicks. Just like that, the access was gone. But the damage wasn't. As I gathered my things, Mr. Carter hesitated. If I may, he said, lowering his voice slightly. It might be a good idea to review any other shared assets. Just to be safe. Safe. I almost smiled. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. When I stepped back outside, the sun had risen higher in the sky. The light felt different now, clearer somehow. I stood there for a moment, holding my purse a little tighter. Daniel hadn't just stayed silent at that table. He had been planning. Carefully. Quietly. And Carolyn. She hadn't been cruel by accident. No. People don't speak like that unless they believe they've already won. I walked slowly to my car, each step steady. The pain in my side was still there, but it no longer defined me. As I sat behind the wheel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. The same silver hair. The same tired eyes. But something else, too. Something sharper. For years, I had told myself that family meant safety. That love meant trust. That sacrifice would be remembered, valued, returned. I was wrong. But not about everything. Because there was one thing I had learned. Something my husband used to say when business deals didn't go as planned. Never make your move while they're watching, he'd tell me. Wait until they think the game is over. I started the engine. The house waited for me. So did they. And for the first time since my surgery, I wasn't going back as the same woman who left. When I got back home, nothing looked different. That was the first thing I noticed. The same driveway. The same front door. The same faint creak when I pushed it open and stepped inside. But once you see something clearly, it never looks the same again. I closed the door quietly behind me, careful not to make noise. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't feel the need to announce myself anymore. Voices drifted from the kitchen. Carolyn's voice, light but sharp around the edges. Daniel's lower, more hesitant. I paused in the hallway, just out of sight. We need to figure out a timeline, Carolyn said. A timeline for what? Daniel asked. For her. She replied, as if it were obvious. We can't keep pretending this is temporary. Temporary. I leaned my hand lightly against the wall, steadying myself. She just had surgery, Daniel said again. But there was something weaker in his tone now. Less resistance. More acceptance. And she's recovering, Carolyn cut in. Exactly. Which means this is the perfect time to transition things. Transition. They spoke about me the way people talk about furniture. Something that had been useful once, but no longer fit the space. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I listened. The house is too much for her anyway, Carolyn continued. Maintenance, bills, everything. It's not realistic. She's managed it for years, Daniel said. With your father, Carolyn corrected. Not alone. There was a brief silence. Then, softer, more calculated. And let's be honest, it's not really her house anymore. That sentence didn't hit me like the insult the day before. It landed differently, because now, I understood the context. The bank, the withdrawals, the access, the paperwork I didn't remember signing. I stepped into the kitchen. Both of them turned. Carolyn recovered first, her expression smoothing into something polite. "You're back early," she said. "I had a few things to take care of," I replied. Daniel looked at me, just for a second longer than usual. "Everything okay?" he asked. It sounded automatic, like something you say because you're supposed to. "Yes," I said. "Everything is clear now." I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to. Carolyn watched me closely. I could see it in her eyes, the subtle shift, the quick calculation. She was trying to read me, but I gave her nothing. I walked past them slowly, opening the refrigerator. Inside, things had been rearranged. Not dramatically, just differently. My usual items pushed to the side. New containers, unfamiliar labels taking up space that used to be mine. I reached for a bottle of water. Simple, ordinary, but even that felt like a quiet act of reclaiming something. "You should rest," Daniel said from behind me. "I will," I replied. But I didn't move. Instead, I turned slightly, leaning against the counter, careful with my side, careful with my posture. "I was thinking," I said, my voice even. "Maybe it's time we reviewed some things." Carolyn's smile tightened. "What kind of things?" she asked. "Just practical matters," I said. "The house, the accounts, responsibilities." Daniel shifted in his chair. "We can talk about that later, Mom. You just got back. I've already started," I said, cutting him off gently. That was new. I had never interrupted him before. The room went quiet. Carolyn tilted her head slightly, studying me. "And what exactly have you started?" she asked. I met her gaze. "Understanding," I said. Just one word. But it was enough. Daniel looked between us, his expression uncertain. Carolyn let out a small laugh. "Well," she said, turning back toward the stove, "that sounds productive." But her movements were different now, less relaxed, more aware. I took a slow sip of water, then set the bottle down. "I'll be upstairs," I said. No one stopped me. No one offered help. And that was fine. The stairs felt steeper than usual, but I took them one at a time. Not rushing, not hesitating, just steady. When I reached my bedroom, I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment. This room, at least, still felt like mine. The same curtains, the same dresser, the same faint scent of lavender I had used for years. But even here, something had shifted. A drawer slightly open, a stack of papers on my desk that I didn't remember leaving there. I walked over slowly, my fingers brushing against the surface before picking up the top sheet. Utility bills, property tax statements, documents I usually handle myself. Except, some of them had been opened already, reviewed, handled, without me. I sat down carefully on the edge of the bed, laying the papers out in front of me. Piece by piece, detail by detail. The picture was becoming clearer. Not all at once, but enough. They hadn't rushed. They hadn't needed to. They had been patient, quiet, waiting for the right moment. And they thought, this was it. I leaned back slightly, closing my eyes for just a second. Not in exhaustion, in focus. Because now, for the first time since my surgery, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was seeing every small change, every quiet decision made without me, every step that led to that moment in the kitchen. "Cook, you old hag." I opened my eyes. The words didn't sting the same way now. They clarified. They revealed. They told me exactly who I was dealing with. And more importantly, what they believed about me. Downstairs, I could hear movement again. Dishes. Footsteps. The normal rhythm of a house continuing its day. As if nothing had changed. But everything had. I reached over to the nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside, beneath a few old photographs, was a small notebook. My handwriting filled the pages. Dates, numbers, reminders. Years of keeping track of things no one else paid attention to. I flipped it open. Slowly. Carefully. If they had been planning, then so could I. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left out of the conversation. I didn't go back downstairs right away. Instead, I sat there on the edge of my bed, the small notebook open in my lap, flipping through pages I hadn't looked at in years. Dates. Numbers. Notes written in my own careful handwriting. Little things. Important things. The kind of things that don't seem urgent until they are. My husband used to tease me about it. You keep track of everything, he would say, smiling as he watched me write. Someone has to, I'd reply. Back then, it felt like a habit. Now, it felt like preparation. I ran my fingers along one of the older entries. Property tax payments, insurance renewals, repairs done over the years. All under my name. All managed by me. Even after he passed, I had kept everything running. Quietly. Consistently. Without asking for help. And yet, somehow, they had made me feel like I couldn't. Like I shouldn't. Like I didn't belong in decisions that were always mine. I closed the notebook gently and set it beside me. Then I reached for the photograph underneath. It was an old one. Me and my husband, standing on the porch the year we finished building the deck. He had one arm around my shoulder, the other holding a hammer like he was proud of it. He always was. Nothing in this house happens without you knowing, he used to say. That's how we keep it ours. Ours. I looked around the room again. Then slowly, I stood up. The pain in my side was still there, but I didn't let it stop me. I moved carefully toward the closet, reaching for the small lockbox on the top shelf. I hadn't opened it in a long time. Not because I didn't trust anyone, but because I never thought I needed to. The key was still where I left it. Inside the jewelry box, tucked beneath a velvet lining. Some things. I never changed. I unlocked the box and lifted the lid. Inside were documents. Not many, but enough. The original house deed. Insurance policies. Copies of older bank records. And something else. A folded envelope with my name written in my husband's handwriting. I paused for a moment before opening it. Not because I was afraid, but because I already knew it mattered. Inside was a short letter. Simple. Direct. Just like him. If anything ever feels wrong, don't wait. Check everything. Trust your instincts, not your assumptions. I let out a slow breath. He had always been like that. Quietly preparing for things no one else wanted to think about. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back. Then I gathered a few of the documents and set them aside. Not everything. Just enough. Enough to confirm what I already suspected. Enough to move forward. Downstairs, I heard Carolyn's voice again. Lighter now. Almost cheerful. As if the conversation earlier had already been forgotten. I closed the lockbox and returned it to its place. Then I picked up the papers and walked out of the room. The stairs didn't feel as heavy this time. Each step was slower. Yes, but steadier. More certain. When I reached the bottom, I could see them in the kitchen again. Daniel at the table. Carolyn near the sink. Everything looked normal. Too normal. I walked in quietly and placed the papers on the counter. Neither of them spoke at first. Carolyn glanced down at the stack, then back at me. What's this? She asked. Just organizing a few things, I said. Daniel shifted in his chair. You don't have to worry about that, Mom. We've been handling. I know, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The words alone were enough to stop him. Carolyn's eyes narrowed slightly. What do you mean by that? She asked. I met her gaze. I mean, I've been to the bank, I said. Silence. Not loud. Not dramatic. But heavy. Daniel's hand froze over his phone. Carolyn didn't move at all. I reviewed the accounts. I continued. There have been some changes. Daniel cleared his throat. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. Just 2 words. Calm. Even. He didn't answer. Carolyn stepped in instead. We were managing things for you, she said smoothly. You've been going through a lot, and we didn't want to burden you. Burden. That word again. I nodded slowly. That's thoughtful, I said, and I meant it exactly the way it sounded. Not warm. Not grateful. Just acknowledged. But I prefer to be informed, I added. Daniel looked down. Carolyn crossed her arms. Well, now you are, she said. There it was. No apology. No explanation. Just a line drawn in the sand. I glanced at the papers on the counter. Then back at them. That's good, I said. Because I'll be making some adjustments. Daniel looked up. What kind of adjustments? I gave a small, almost polite smile. The kind that don't require permission, I said. Carolyn let out a short laugh, but it didn't sound as confident as before. I think you're overreacting, she said. Am I? I replied. Again calm. Steady. She didn't answer. I picked up the papers and turned toward the stairs. I'll be upstairs if anyone needs me, I said. No one followed. No one stopped me. And as I walked away, I could feel it. Not fear. Not yet. But something close to it. A shift. The beginning of it. Because for the first time, they were no longer completely sure of me. And that was exactly where I needed them to be. I stayed in my room for the rest of the afternoon. Not because I was tired, but because I needed space to think without interruption. The house carried on below me. Footsteps, cabinet doors, the low hum of conversation, but I didn't go down. I didn't insert myself back into a rhythm that had already learned how to exist without me. Instead, I sat at my desk. The documents from the lockbox were spread out in front of me, the notebook open beside them, my pen resting between my fingers, unmoving for a long time. I wasn't rushing. That was the difference now. Before I would have reacted, asked questions, tried to fix things immediately. Now, I was observing, connecting, understanding. I picked up one of the older bank statements and compared it to the recent activity I had seen that morning. The pattern was clearer when you looked at it side by side. Small withdrawals at first, then slightly larger ones. Always spaced out. Always quiet. Not random. Planned. I wrote down the dates. Then the amounts. Then I flipped to another page and started noting something else. The timing of my medical appointments. Consultations. Tests. The surgery itself. Every moment when I had been distracted, vulnerable, trusting someone else to handle things for me. The overlap wasn't a coincidence. I set the pen down for a moment and leaned back in my chair. They hadn't just taken money. They had taken advantage of timing, of distraction, of trust. And that told me something important. This wasn't impulsive. It wasn't emotional. It was deliberate. A soft knock came at the door. I didn't answer right away. The knock came again, slightly firmer. Mom, Daniel's voice. I looked at the papers in front of me. Then I closed the notebook. Come in, I said. He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he just stood there, as if unsure where to place himself in the room. That, more than anything, felt unfamiliar. This used to be his house too. Now he looked like a visitor. Hey, he said. Hi, I replied. A pause stretched between us. He glanced at the desk, at the papers, then quickly looked away. I wanted to check on you, he said. See how you're feeling. I'm recovering, I said. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. He nodded, shifting his weight slightly. About earlier, he started, then stopped. I waited. I should have told you about the account, he said finally. Yes, he should have, but I didn't say that. Instead, I asked, why didn't you? He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. I thought it would be easier, he said. You had so much going on, and I didn't want to stress you out. The same words. The same explanation. Easier. For who? I studied his face. There was guilt there. Real, or practiced, I wasn't sure yet. And the withdrawals? I asked. His eyes flickered. What about them? They weren't for household expenses. I said. It wasn't a question. Another pause. They were temporary, he said. I was going to put it back. Temporary. I nodded once. And Carolyn? I asked. He hesitated. What about her? Was she aware? I asked. That was the moment he looked away. Not down. Not at his hands. Away. Toward the window. Yes, he said quietly. Of course. I didn't feel surprised. I felt confirmed. I see, I said. Silence settled between us again. Different this time. He took a step closer to the desk. Mom, it's not what you think, he said. I almost smiled. That depends, I replied. What do you think I think? He didn't answer, because there was no version of this that sounded better when spoken out loud. I'm not upset, I said. That made him look up. Really, he asked. Yes, I said. And it was true. Upset would have meant I was still expecting something different from them. I wasn't. I just needed to understand. I continued. And now you do? He asked. Yes, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. He nodded slowly, as if accepting something he couldn't change. Okay, he said. If you need anything, just let me know. Anything. The word echoed in my mind. I watched him turn toward the door. Daniel, I said. He stopped, but didn't turn around right away. Yes. Next time, I said. Don't wait until I have to find out on my own. He stood there for a moment, then nodded. I won't, he said. And he left. The door closed softly behind him. I sat there for a while after that, not thinking about what he said, but about what he didn't. No apology. No real explanation. Just acknowledgement. And that told me everything I needed to know. I turned back to the desk and opened the notebook again. This time, I started a new page. At the top, I wrote one word, control. Then beneath it, I began listing everything that still belonged to me. The house, the accounts, what remained of them, the documents in the lockbox, every small piece they hadn't touched yet, every detail they assumed I wouldn't notice. I wrote slowly, carefully, because this wasn't about reacting anymore. It was about positioning. They thought I was recovering. Weak. Dependent. They thought time was on their side. I placed the pen down and looked at the page. Then I closed the notebook. Outside my window, the light had started to fade. Another day ending. Another shift settling into place. Downstairs, I could hear Carolyn laughing. Light. Carefree. As if everything was already decided. I stood up slowly, walking over to the window. For a moment, I just looked out at the yard. The same yard my husband used to stand in, hands on his hips, planning the next thing he wanted to fix. He never rushed. He never acted without knowing exactly what he was doing. And he always told me the same thing. Timing matters more than force. I let that settle in my mind. Then I turned away from the window. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. Not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, I didn't wait. Not for breakfast. Not for conversation. Not for permission. I woke up early, earlier than usual. The house was still quiet, wrapped in that thin layer of silence that only exists before everyone else begins their day. For a moment, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing. Steady, controlled. The pain in my side was still there, but it had become background noise. Manageable. Predictable. Unlike everything else. I got dressed slowly, choosing something simple but deliberate. Not my usual house clothes. Something structured. Something that made me feel put together. Because today wasn't about recovery. It was about movement. Downstairs, the kitchen was empty when I entered. No Carolyn. No Daniel. Good. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. The same table where, just days ago, I had been told to cook, like I was nothing more than a servant in my own home. I didn't react then, but I remembered. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth settle in. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. There was a number I hadn't called in years. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I never thought I'd need him again. I dialed anyway. It rang twice. Good morning, a calm voice answered. Harrison and Cole Law Offices. This is Margaret Whitmore, I said. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mr. Cole. There was a brief pause, then a shift in tone. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. He'll be available this afternoon. Would 2 p.m. work for you? Yes, I said. It would. After I hung up, I sat there for a moment longer, just holding the phone, letting it sink in, because that one call changed the direction of everything. Footsteps echoed from upstairs. I didn't move. Carolyn entered the kitchen first, already dressed, already composed. She stopped for half a second when she saw me sitting there, then smiled. Up early, she said. I had things to do, I replied. She walked past me, reaching for a glass. Still trying to keep busy? She asked lightly. I looked at her. Yes, I said. Something like that. Daniel came in a few moments later, adjusting his watch, his attention already divided between time and whatever was waiting for him outside the house. Morning, he said. Morning, I replied. Carolyn glanced between us. We have a few errands today, she said. Might be out most of the afternoon. I nodded. That works, I said. She raised an eyebrow slightly. For what? She asked. For me, I said. Just that. Nothing more. She didn't ask again, but I could feel it, that small shift in her attention, the awareness that something was moving outside of her control. Good. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it carefully in the sink. Then I picked up my purse. I'll be heading out too, I said. Daniel looked up. Where are you going? He asked. To take care of a few things, I replied. He hesitated. Do you need help? He asked. I met his eyes. No, I said. I don't. That was new too. And he knew it. I left the house without waiting for another question. The drive felt different from the day before. Yesterday had been about discovery. Today was about action. When I pulled into the parking lot of the law office, I didn't rush to get out of the car. I sat there for a moment, looking at the building. Clean lines. Neutral colors. Professional. Unemotional. Exactly what I needed. Inside, everything was quiet. Ordered. Predictable. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Cole is expecting you. Of course he was. I was shown into his office a few minutes later. He stood as I entered. Older now, grayer than I remembered, but still the same steady presence. Margaret, he said warmly. It's been a long time. Yes, I said. It has. We sat. No small talk. No unnecessary words. That's why I trusted him. I need to review everything, I said. The house, the accounts, any legal access tied to my name. He didn't ask why. He didn't look surprised. He simply nodded. All right, he said. Start from the beginning. So I did. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just facts. The surgery. The bank. The access. The withdrawals. The conversation in the kitchen. The words. Cook, you old hag. I didn't raise my voice when I said it. But he heard it. I could tell. When I finished, the room was quiet. He leaned back slightly, his fingers resting together. You've done the right thing by coming here, he said. I thought so, I replied. There are a few steps we can take immediately, he continued. First, we'll secure all assets under your sole authority. Second, we'll review any documents that may have been signed under questionable circumstances. I nodded. And the house? I asked. He looked at me directly. As far as I can see, it's still legally yours, he said. But we'll verify everything. Still mine. The words settled in slowly. Not as relief. As confirmation. Good, I said. He opened a folder and began outlining the next steps. Precise. Methodical. No emotion. Just structure. Exactly what I needed. By the time I left his office, the sun was lower in the sky. The day had moved forward. And so had I. When I got back into my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, hands resting on the wheel, breathing, because something had shifted again. Not inside the house. Inside me. For days, they had been moving quietly, planning, adjusting, believing I wouldn't notice. Now, I was the one moving, and they didn't even know it yet. I started the engine, and for the first time since this all began, I wasn't just reacting to what they had done. I was preparing for what I would do next. When I got home that evening, the lights were already on. That was unusual. Normally, Carolyn preferred natural light during the day, and Daniel didn't pay attention to lights at all. But now, every room on the first floor was lit, bright, deliberate, almost staged. I stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind me. Voices again. Lower this time. More controlled. They were in the living room. I didn't walk in right away. Instead, I paused just out of sight, the same way I had the day before. Not to hide. To listen. We need to move faster, Carolyn said. Her voice was calm, but tighter than usual. Daniel exhaled. You're overthinking this, he replied. She doesn't know anything. A small silence followed. Then Carolyn spoke again. She went to the bank, she said. So she had noticed. Of course she had. And? Daniel asked. And that's not something she usually does without telling us, Carolyn said. Not lately. Lately. I almost smiled. Daniel didn't respond right away. She said she was just reviewing things, he said finally. And you believe that? Carolyn asked. There it was. The crack. Not in their plan. In their confidence. I stepped into the room. Both of them turned immediately. Carolyn's expression shifted first, smile, then calculation. Daniel just looked tired. You're back, Carolyn said. I am, I replied. I walked in slowly, setting my purse down on the side table. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just present. How was your day? Daniel asked. Productive, I said. That was all. Carolyn studied me for a moment longer than necessary. What kind of productive? She asked. I met her eyes. The kind that clears things up, I said. Again, simple, but enough. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Carolyn let out a small laugh, turning slightly away. Well, clarity is always a good thing, she said. But her tone had changed. Less certain. I sat down in the armchair, her armchair now, the one that had replaced mine. I didn't ask. I didn't hesitate. I just sat. That, more than anything, seemed to catch her off guard. Daniel noticed too. You feeling okay? He asked. Yes, I said. Better, actually. And I was. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. Carolyn crossed her arms lightly. We were just talking about you, she said. I gathered that, I replied. She smiled again. We're just concerned, she said. About what's best for you moving forward. Concern. Another familiar word. I nodded once. I appreciate that, I said. And I meant it exactly the way it sounded. Neutral. Measured. Nothing more. Daniel shifted in his seat. Mom, we were thinking maybe we should sit down soon and talk about next steps, he said. Next steps, I repeated. Yes, he said. Just to make sure everything is organized. Organized. I let that word settle. Then I nodded. That sounds like a good idea, I said. Carolyn's eyes flickered, just slightly. She hadn't expected agreement. When would you like to do that? I asked. Daniel glanced at Carolyn. Maybe this weekend, he said. That works, I replied. No resistance. No hesitation. Just acceptance. And that unsettled them more than any argument would have. Because they were waiting for emotion. For confusion. For weakness. Instead they got calm. I stood up slowly. I'll make sure I have everything ready, I said. Carolyn tilted her head. Everything, she asked. Yes, I said. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Then I picked up my purse again. I'm going to rest, I added. No one stopped me. No one asked anything else. But I could feel it as I walked away. Their attention. Following me. Trying to understand. Trying to adjust. Upstairs, I closed my door and sat down at the desk again. The papers were still there. The notebook. The plan. I opened it and turned to the page I had started earlier. Control. Underneath it, I added a new word. Timing. Because now, everything was about timing. They wanted the weekend. They wanted a conversation. They wanted to organize. Good. So did I. But not the way they expected. I picked up my pen and began writing again. Not notes this time. Steps. Clear. Simple. Precise. What to bring. What to say. What not to say. What to let them believe. Right up until the moment it no longer mattered. Downstairs, I could hear Carolyn moving around again. Cabinets. Footsteps. Normal sounds. But there was something underneath them now. Something quieter. Less certain. I paused for a moment, listening. Then I closed the notebook. Because I didn't need to write everything down. Some things you just know. I walked to the window and looked out at the yard. The same yard. The same house. The same life. But not the same position. Not anymore. They thought the weekend would be their moment. The point where everything became official. Where decisions were made. Where I stepped aside. I let out a slow breath. Then I turned away from the window. Because by the time that conversation happened, they wouldn't be the ones in control. I would. The next 2 days passed quietly. Too quietly. No arguments. No tension. No raised voices. Just politeness. Carolyn smiled more than usual. Daniel asked if I needed anything. Twice. Even dinner felt different. Not warmer. Not kinder. Just controlled. Like they were adjusting. Recalculating. And that told me everything I needed to know. They were preparing. So was I? On Friday morning, I woke up before the alarm. The house was still asleep. I sat up slowly, letting my feet rest on the floor for a moment before standing. The pain in my side had eased slightly, but I still moved carefully. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Every movement mattered now. Every detail. I got dressed the same way I had the day before. Simple, but deliberate. Then I walked to my desk and opened the drawer. The notebook was exactly where I left it. So were the documents. But now, they weren't just information. They were leverage. I selected only what I needed. Not everything. Just enough. That was the key. You don't show your entire hand. You show what's necessary when it matters. I placed the papers neatly into a folder and slipped it into my bag. Then I paused, looking around the room one more time, making sure nothing felt rushed. Nothing felt reactive. Because this wasn't reaction anymore. This was positioning. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled like coffee. Carolyn was already there. Of course she was. She turned when she heard me. Good morning, she said, her voice light. Good morning, I replied. Daniel joined us a minute later, buttoning his shirt, glancing between us as if trying to read something that hadn't been spoken yet. We're still on for tomorrow, right? Carolyn asked, pouring herself coffee. For what? I said. She smiled. Our little conversation. Little. I nodded. Yes, I said. We are. Daniel looked relieved. Carolyn looked satisfied. Neither of them asked what I would bring to that conversation. And I didn't offer. The rest of the day passed the same way. Quiet. Measured. Predictable on the surface. But underneath, everything was shifting. I spent most of the afternoon in my room. Not resting. Preparing. I reviewed every document again. Every number. Every date. Every small detail that confirmed what I already knew. Then I closed the folder and set it aside. No more reviewing. No more thinking. At some point, you stop preparing. And you wait. Saturday came slower than expected. The morning light stretched across the floor as I walked downstairs. They were already seated at the table. Both of them. Waiting. That, more than anything, made me pause. They had chosen the setting. The timing. The structure. They believed they were in control. I walked in calmly and took my seat. No hesitation. No acknowledgement of the setup. Just presence. Carolyn folded her hands on the table. Daniel leaned forward slightly. We just want to talk about what's best moving forward, Carolyn began. Of course she did. I nodded. I agree, I said. That seemed to encourage her. She smiled. As you know, the house requires a lot of upkeep, she continued. And given your recent health situation, she let the sentence trail off, letting me fill in the meaning. I didn't. Daniel stepped in. We've been thinking it might be easier if we reorganize things a bit, he said. Reorganize. Another careful word. And what does that look like? I asked. Calm. Neutral. Open. Carolyn leaned back slightly. Well, she said, we could take over the house management entirely. Bills, maintenance, everything. Everything. And me? I asked. A small pause. You would still live here, of course, she said quickly. But without the stress. Stress. I nodded slowly. And the ownership? I asked. That was the moment. The one they had been circling. Daniel hesitated. Carolyn didn't. It would make sense to formalize things, she said. For the future. Formalize. Such a clean word for something so calculated. I let the silence stretch. Just long enough. Then I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. Not opening it. Not yet. Both of them looked at it. Then at me. What's that? Daniel asked. Just a few things I reviewed, I said. Carolyn's eyes narrowed slightly. You've been busy, she said. Yes, I replied. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and turned it toward them. Bank statements. Dates. Numbers. Clear. Undeniable. Daniel leaned forward. Carolyn didn't move. At least, not at first. These are recent transactions, I said. From my account. No accusation. No emotion. Just fact. Daniel's face tightened. Carolyn's expression shifted, just slightly. Like I said, she began. We were managing things for you. I know, I said. That stopped her. I understand exactly what you were doing, I continued. Silence. Heavy this time. Different. Because now, they knew I knew. I closed the folder. Calmly. And placed my hand on top of it. And now, I said, we can talk about what happens next. I looked at them both. One at a time. Steady. Unwavering. Because this conversation was no longer theirs to control. Daniel was the first to react. That doesn't mean what you think it means, he said quickly, his voice tighter than before. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Carolyn, on the other hand, stayed very still. She didn't look at the papers again. She looked at me. Studying. Recalculating. Then explain it, I said. Calm. Even. No pressure in my tone. Just space. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hands rested flat on the table now, no longer reaching for his phone. They were temporary transfers, he said finally. I told you. I was going to put it back. I nodded once. You said that, I replied. Silence followed. I let it sit there. Because silence has a way of doing something words can't. It forces truth to surface. Carolyn leaned forward slightly. We've already discussed this, she said. There's no need to turn it into something bigger than it is. I looked at her. There is, I said. 2 words. Nothing more. But it shifted the air in the room. Daniel exhaled again, longer this time. Mom, we're trying to make things easier for you, he said. For me, I repeated. Yes, he said. You've been through a lot. The surgery, the recovery, we just thought it made sense to step in. Step in. I rested my hand lightly on the folder. And stepping in includes accessing my accounts without a conversation? I asked. He didn't answer right away. Carolyn did. You signed the authorization, she said. There it was. The line they were holding. The justification. I did, I said. No denial. No argument. That seemed to surprise them. But I didn't understand what I was signing, I added. Another shift. Subtle. But real. Daniel looked at Carolyn. Carolyn didn't look back. That's not our fault, she said. I held her gaze. No, I said. It isn't. That made her pause. Because that wasn't the response she expected. I wasn't blaming. I wasn't accusing. I was stating. And that made it harder to push back. I leaned back slightly in my chair. But it is my responsibility, I continued. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean, he asked. I mean, I should have paid closer attention, I said. I should have reviewed things sooner. That was the truth. And I said it without hesitation. Because owning it gave me something they didn't expect. Control. Carolyn's posture shifted again, just a little. Less certain. And now you have, she said. Yes, I replied. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't theirs. It was mine. I let it stretch. Then I spoke. I've removed access to my accounts, I said. Daniel's head lifted immediately. You what? It's already done, I said. Carolyn's expression didn't change much. But her eyes did. Sharp. Focused. When? She asked. Yesterday, I said. Another silence. Heavier now. Because this wasn't something they could undo with words. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. You should have talked to us first, he said. I almost smiled. I did, I said. He looked at me. Confused. In the kitchen, I added. When I said I had started reviewing things. He didn't respond. Because he remembered. And he knew. Carolyn folded her arms again. Well, she said, that seems unnecessary. Is it? I asked. She didn't answer. Because now, the structure had shifted. They weren't explaining anymore. They were reacting. And that was new. I reached into the folder again and pulled out a second document. This one, I didn't turn toward them right away. I held it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table. The house, I said. Both of them looked at it. Then at me. What about it? Daniel asked. I've had it reviewed, I said. Carolyn's eyes narrowed. Reviewed by who? She asked. A lawyer, I said. That word landed differently. You could feel it. Not loud, but heavy. Daniel sat up straighter. A lawyer, he repeated. Yes, I said. For what? To understand my position, I replied. Carolyn let out a short breath through her nose. That seems a bit extreme, she said. Does it? I asked. Again calm. Again steady. No emotion. Because emotion would have given them something to push against. This gave them nothing. I slid the document slightly closer to them. The house is still legally mine, I said. Daniel's eyes dropped to the paper. Carolyn didn't look. Not yet. And it will remain that way, I added. That was the first statement in the room that wasn't open. Wasn't negotiable. Just final. Daniel swallowed. Mom. No one's trying to take your house, he said. I looked at him. Directly. You were discussing formalizing ownership yesterday, I said. His face tightened. Carolyn finally looked down at the paper. Just for a second. Then back at me. That was a conversation about the future, she said. Yes, I replied. And I let that word sit there. Because now, the future had changed. I closed the folder again. Slowly. Deliberately. Then rested both hands on the table. I'm not here to argue, I said. And I wasn't. I'm here to clarify, I continued. Neither of them spoke. They were listening now. Really listening. Because the balance had shifted. This house, I said, is mine. No emphasis. No raised voice. Just fact. My accounts, I added, are mine. Another pause. And from this point forward, I said, every decision regarding them will be made by me. Silence. Deep. Unavoidable. Daniel looked down. Carolyn held my gaze. Longer this time. Trying to find something. Anything. But there was nothing left to read. Because I had already said everything that mattered. And for the first time since this began, they understood exactly where they stood. No one spoke after that. Not right away. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt heavy. Final. Like something had already ended, even if no one had said it out loud. Daniel was the first to break. Mom, you're taking this too far, he said quietly. I looked at him. Am I? I asked. He hesitated. Because now, even he wasn't sure. Carolyn leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms again. But this time, it wasn't confidence. It was defense. You're overreacting to a situation we were trying to manage responsibly, she said. I nodded once. I understand that's how you see it, I replied. That answer caught her off guard. She expected resistance. Emotion. Instead, she got acknowledgement. And that made it harder for her to push. Daniel rubbed his temples. This doesn't have to turn into a conflict, he said. We can still figure this out together. Together. I let that word sit there for a moment. Then I stood up. Slowly. Carefully. Not because I was weak. Because I wanted every movement to be intentional. There's nothing left to figure out, I said. My voice stayed even. Measured. Controlled. Carolyn watched me closely now. So that's it, she asked. You're just going to shut us out. I picked up the folder from the table. I'm not shutting anyone out, I said. I paused, then added. I'm stepping back into what was already mine. That landed. Daniel looked down again. Carolyn didn't move. But I could see it. That moment where control slips, just slightly. And once it slips, it doesn't come back the same way. I turned to leave the table. Where are you going? Daniel asked. To rest, I said. Then I stopped. just for a second, without turning around. And Daniel, I added. He looked up. If you ever intended to put it back, I said, you should have done it before I had to ask. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked away. Upstairs, I closed the door behind me and sat down in the same chair by the window. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This one was different, heavier, more aware. They were downstairs. I could hear faint movement. No voices, no laughter, just silence. Processing, adjusting. For the first time since this began, they weren't in control of the next step. I was. About an hour later, there was a knock at my door. Not soft, not hesitant, controlled. Margaret, Carolyn's voice. I didn't answer immediately. Then, come in, I said. She opened the door slowly and stepped inside. Alone. That told me something. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment, studying me again. Always studying. You've made your point, she said. I didn't respond. Because that wasn't true. Not yet. She took a step closer. But this approach, she continued, it's not going to work long term. I looked at her. And what approach would you suggest? I asked. She didn't hesitate. Cooperation, she said. Of course. Mutual understanding, she added. I nodded slightly. And what does that look like to you? I asked. She smiled faintly. Shared responsibility, she said. Shared decision-making. Shared. There it was again. I held her gaze. You mean shared control? I said. Her smile tightened. If that's how you want to phrase it, she replied. I let a small silence pass. Then I stood up. Slowly. Again, deliberate. No, I said. Just that. No explanation. No expansion. Just no. For the first time, her expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. That's not realistic, she said. It is, I replied. Not in this situation, she said. In this situation especially, I answered. She took a breath, sharpening her tone slightly. You're not in the position you think you are, she said. There it was. The first real push. I didn't react. Not outwardly. But I noted it. Carefully. Then clarify it for me. I said. She paused. Just a second too long. Because now, she had to choose her words. And that meant she wasn't as certain as she wanted to appear. You're recovering, she said finally. You need support. Structure. Stability. I nodded. And you believe you provide that, I said. Yes, she replied. Confident again. Or trying to be. I stepped a little closer. Not confrontational. Just present. I believe I can provide that for myself, I said. Another silence. Shorter this time. Sharper. You're making this harder than it needs to be, she said. No, I replied. I'm making it clear. That was the difference. And she knew it. We stood there for a moment. Facing each other. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just truth. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Finally, she exhaled. You're going to regret this, she said. I didn't respond right away. I let the words settle. Then I said, no, calm. Certain. Because regret only comes when you doubt your position. And I didn't. Not anymore. She watched me for a moment longer. Then turned. And walked out. The door closed behind her. I stood there for a few seconds. Then I walked back to the window. Outside, the yard looked exactly the same. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. Because this wasn't about a conversation anymore. Or even the money. It was about something deeper. Control. Respect. Ownership. And they had already shown me how they saw me. Now, I had shown them something too. Not loudly. Not emotionally. But clearly. And from this point forward, every move they made would be a reaction. Not a plan. Because the plan was already mine. The house stayed quiet that night. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just careful. Every movement downstairs felt measured. Cabinets opened and closed softer than usual. Footsteps were lighter. Even the air felt different, like everyone was aware that something had shifted and no one quite knew how to move around it yet. I didn't go back down. I didn't need to. I already knew what was happening. They were adjusting. The next morning, I came downstairs at my usual time. No rush. No hesitation. Just routine. Daniel was already at the table, staring into his coffee like he hadn't slept much. Carolyn stood by the counter, her back to me, her movements precise as she sliced something on the cutting board. Neither of them spoke right away. That was new. Before, silence felt dismissive. Now it felt cautious. Good morning, I said. Daniel looked up. Morning, Mom. Carolyn turned a second later. Good morning, she echoed. Polite. Controlled. I poured myself coffee and sat down. Same chair. Same table. Same place. But not the same position. Daniel cleared his throat. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, he began. I didn't respond. I let him continue. I transferred the money back this morning, he said. There it was. Not an apology. An action. I nodded once. Good, I said. Nothing more. No praise. No relief. Just acknowledgement. Carolyn set the knife down. That wasn't necessary, she said, her tone tighter than before. Daniel didn't look at her. I wanted to fix it, he replied. Fix it. I took a slow sip of coffee. You can't fix something by pretending it didn't happen, I said. Again calm. Again steady. Daniel nodded slightly. I know, he said. Carolyn crossed her arms. This is getting out of proportion, she said. Money was moved. It's been returned. There's no reason to keep escalating. Escalating. I looked at her. I'm not escalating, I said. I'm clarifying. That word again. She didn't like it. I could tell. Because clarity leaves no room for interpretation. And she preferred control. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What do you want to happen now, he asked. A fair question. I set my cup down. I want things to be as they were meant to be, I said. And what does that mean, he asked. It means, I replied, you live here as my son, not as someone managing me. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. I turned my gaze to Carolyn. And you, I said, live here as his wife, not as someone deciding what happens to me. Silence. Deep. Uncomfortable. But necessary. Carolyn's jaw tightened slightly. That's a very limited way of looking at a shared household, she said. No, I replied. It's a very clear one. She didn't respond immediately, because there wasn't much left to argue. The lines had already been drawn. Daniel exhaled slowly. We can respect that, he said. Carolyn glanced at him. A quick look. Sharp. But she didn't say anything. Not yet. I nodded once. Good, I said. The rest of the day passed quietly. But not the same kind of quiet as before. This one had weight. Structure. Boundaries. Daniel kept his distance, but in a different way now. Less avoidance. More awareness. Carolyn, on the other hand, moved carefully. Every word measured. Every glance intentional. She was watching. Still calculating. But differently. Because now she knew I was watching too. In the afternoon, I received a call. Mr. Cole, everything has been secured on our end, he said. Accounts, access, documentation. You're fully protected now. Protected. I looked out the window as he spoke. The yard was still. Unchanged. Thank you, I said. There's one more thing, he added. If you decide to make further changes, ownership, estate, anything like that, we can proceed whenever you're ready. I paused. Not because I didn't understand, but because I did. I'll let you know, I said. And I meant it. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. No forced conversation. No unnecessary tension. Just space. At one point, Daniel looked up. I'm sorry, he said. Just like that. Simple. Direct. I met his eyes. I know, I replied. Because now, I did. Not because he said it, but because of what he had done. The transfer. The shift. The acknowledgement. Carolyn didn't speak during that moment. She just watched. Still. Silent. And that told me something too. Later that night, I sat by the window again. The same place. The same view. But everything felt settled. Not resolved. But set. Because the outcome was already forming. Not through argument. Not through emotion. But through position. They had adjusted. Daniel had stepped back. Carolyn had gone quiet. The house had found a new balance. One that didn't revolve around their assumptions anymore, but around my decisions. I folded my hands in my lap and looked out into the dark yard. For the first time since my surgery, I didn't feel displaced. I didn't feel uncertain. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. Because I already had. Not to them. To myself. And that was enough. Because once you take back control, you don't give it away again. A week passed. Not quickly. Not slowly. Just steadily. The kind of time that doesn't feel dramatic, but changes everything underneath. The house had settled into something new. Not warmer. Not colder. Just clear. Daniel went back to his routine. Work, calls, quiet evenings. But there was a difference now. He knocked before entering my room. He asked before making decisions that involved the house. Small things. But intentional. Carolyn, on the other hand, became quieter. Not distant. Not withdrawn. Just measured. She no longer filled the space with assumptions. No longer spoke for me. no longer moved things without asking. She adjusted, because she had to. One morning, I stood in the kitchen alone. The sunlight came through the window the same way it always had. Soft, steady, familiar. For the first time in a long time. It felt like mine again. I reached for the kettle, filled it, and set it on the stove. No one told me to. No one expected me to. I simply chose to. That was the difference. Later that day, I made one more call. Not out of urgency. Not out of fear. Out of clarity. "Mr. Cole," I said, "I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. A few days later, the documents were finalized. Clean. Precise. Irreversible. The house remained in my name. The accounts secured. And something else. Something they didn't expect. A new will. Not emotional. Not reactive. Just structured. Intentional. Balanced. Exactly the way I wanted it. That evening, I called them both into the living room. No tension. No raised voices. Just presence. They sat across from me. Waiting. This time, not leading. I placed the envelope on the table. "I've made some decisions," I said. Daniel nodded slowly. Carolyn said nothing. "I've updated everything." I continued. "The house, the accounts, the future." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What does that mean?" he asked. I met his eyes. "It means everything is clear now," I said. Then I slid the envelope toward them. They didn't open it right away. They didn't need to. Because the tone had already told them what mattered. "I'm not removing you from my life," I added. And that was true. I'm just defining my place in it. Silence. But not the same silence as before. This one was understood. Daniel nodded. "I get it," he said. And this time, I believed him. Carolyn looked at the envelope, then back at me. For a moment, I saw something different in her expression. Not calculation. Not control. Something quieter. Recognition. She gave a small nod. No words. But enough. That night, I sat by the window again. The same place. The same chair. The same view. But everything felt complete. Not perfect. Not ideal. But resolved. Because the question was never just about money. Or the house. Or even the words she said to me that morning in the kitchen. "Cook, you old hag." I could still hear them. But they didn't echo the same way anymore. They didn't hurt. They clarified. They showed me exactly where I stood. And more importantly, where I needed to stand. I thought about my husband. About the way he used to look at this house. Not just as a place to live, but as something we built. Protected. Understood. "Nothing in this house happens without you knowing," he used to say. He was right. I just needed to remember it. Downstairs, I could hear quiet movement. Life continuing. Not over me. Not around me. But alongside me. The way it should have been all along. I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. At 72, you learn something important. Strength doesn't always look like resistance. Sometimes, it looks like stillness. Like patience. Like knowing exactly when to act and when not to. They thought I was weak. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought time was on their side. They were wrong. Because in the end, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight. I didn't beg to be respected. I simply took back what was already mine. Quietly. Completely. And without asking for permission. If you've ever felt invisible in your own home. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people you trusted. Remember this. You don't need to prove your strength. You just need to recognize it. And once you do, everything changes. Thank you for listening to the whole story. If you were in that situation, how would you handle it? Please leave a comment to let me know your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more great videos.